So today I'm going to tell you about the problems with the U.S. college system. I'm just going to turn the light on, make it a little bit more bright. So yeah, I'm going to tell you about a guy called Frank Reedy. Now, I read a book about him called Running Full Circle. It was like his autobiography, and yeah, it's just a very interesting story. He was an Irish guy in the U.S. college system back in the '70s in East Tennessee University. I was going to make a video about him. So he was born in Dublin in 1951, but he moved to a place called I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, Ballyhonus in County Mayo shortly after he was born. So he pretty much, his mother just went to Dublin just so he just to give birth to him, pretty much, because I guess in those days there weren't as many hospitals, you know. And yeah, so he had a very unhealthy childhood. His father suffered from depression. Um, so his father, he grew up on a farm. His father also worked in a construction site. His employer wasn't very good. Um, his father would often show up to work, and his employer would say, "Oh no, there's no work for you today. Go home." So yeah, so they had to do farming to keep the family going. Apparently, his father suffered from depression. He often wouldn't get up out of bed in the morning. So Frank really had to help out on the farm a lot. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's not a very healthy way to grow up. If you know what I mean. So yeah, so he failed his intercert at 15, which is now what we call the junior cert. And so he ended up becoming a junior postman in Ballyhonus. Now, I think he was the reason he failed the intercert was because he was really bad at maths. I think like English literature and poetry and stuff, that was his strong point. Yeah, but he failed maths. Well, you can't do the leaving cert. You can't do anything with your life apparently. So yeah. Anyway, so one day his neighbor tried to get him into boxing. He tried the boxing. He didn't really like the sparring part, but he enjoyed the road runs, so he decided to stick to running. Now, Frank Greeley, I'm convinced he has very bad genetics because when he was working as a postman, he'd often be walking past all these girls and they'd be making fun of him, slagging him, damaging his self-esteem. And yeah, they do that because apparently they want, according to some videos I watched, women want a very clear hierarchy. They want attract the attractive guys to be high up in society, to be the successful people, to be the highest value men. They want the ugly men to be down at the bottom. So it's very obvious for them, because if an ugly guy is doing very well in his life, then a woman is kind of like confused and it's kind of harder to pick. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so I think he probably didn't have the best looks, so he probably had bad genetics. But yeah, he still did very well as a runner in the early years, at least. So yeah, that just goes to show that genetics aren't everything in running. You can still do very well with bad genetics. Do you know what I mean? So don't use the genetic argument as an excuse. So yeah, so back then in the late '60s, running was seen as a bit of a weird thing to be doing in Ireland. He was out running early one morning through Ballyhonus, and one of his neighbours, who was a woman, came up to him and said, Francis, is there something wrong at home that has you out running at this hour? And Frank really said, "No, I'm just out training in the pursuit of athletic excellence. I'm trying to follow the example of Emil Zatopek." And yeah, that's the thing, because running as a sport was not very common back then. If you were seen out running, people were kind of confused. They're like, was he fleeing a crime scene? Is he trying to spread a message or something? What's he trying to do? And that's just the way it was back then. We hadn't got the running boom, as it was called. That was one thing people had to deal with back then. You had to deal with strangers thinking that you were a bit insane going out running. So yeah, so he finished his junior postman apprenticeship at 19 and moved to Dublin. Because the thing is, back then there's no vacancies for a senior postman in Ballyhonus. So he moved to Dublin to become a senior postman, so covering the Swords area up near the airport. He joined Dunor Harriers. Now Dunor Harriers, they train kind of near the Phoenix Park, second biggest city park in the world. So yeah, he joined them, and yeah, I get the idea that he was a bit wild. I think his coach had to often write him letters saying, telling him about the importance of slow, gradual improvements, because he seemed to just train like a lunatic, apparently. Okay. So in 1970, at the age of 19, he ran 30 minutes and 17 seconds in the 10,000 meters. That was 51 years ago. To this day, that is still the Irish junior record. Okay. So that's pretty impressive. And I think even back then they still had to run on cinder tracks, so the surface wasn't as good as modern tracks today. So he probably could have ran even faster if it was on a cinder track. Okay, because I think it was like the early 70s that they switched to the artificial surface. I'm not 100% certain though. Um, so anyway, 1972, he got a U.S. scholarship to the University of East Tennessee. Now his team there was really just like an Irish. It was known as the Irish Brigade. Everyone on that team was Irish. It's kind of funny, you know. Um, so kind of funny considering in Ireland running was seen as a bit of a weird sport. I guess those who had the guts to actually go out and run tend to do quite well back then. So yeah, he went over with a bit of an injury. He didn't say anything to the coaches because he was afraid they'd cancel his scholarship. Okay, that was a very real risk, because back then, going to university was a rare opportunity in Ireland, especially for a guy who failed his Intercert. It's unheard of, even today. But anyway, so he managed to go to university. I think he studied, was it literature or film or something like that. Then again, because that was a strong point. So now the coaches there, they weren't very good. See, they had this guy called Neil Kushak from Limerick. Now Neil Kushak, he ran at the 1972 Olympics. He was a 28-minute 10K runner, very high standard. In 1974, he won the Boston Marathon in a time of 2 hours 13 minutes. He is the only Irish person to ever win the Boston Marathon. Okay, as well, it's very hard to do it nowadays with all the Kenyans and Ethiopians and stuff like that. This was before the Kenyans and Ethiopians really came onto the scene. So, because running was still an amateur sport back then. So, yeah, the coaches, they didn't know what they were doing. They kind of asked, because Neil Kushak was the star of the show, they asked him, all right, so how do you train? And Neil Kushak told them how he trained, and they based his training on what he did. And that worked for Neil Kushak, but it didn't work for everybody else. It didn't work for Frank Reilly. Okay, because you have to remember, he's, over 10K, he's 2 minutes slower. He's maybe not able to handle the same volume or intensity. He probably needed to, do less mileage, do everything a little bit slower. Maybe train as part of a separate group, but no, that's not how they did it over there. So here's what a typical training day would look like. So they do 6 miles easy in the morning. In the afternoon, they would do an 11-mile mountain run, okay? And they'd follow that up by 10 by 400 meters on the track. So yeah, 6 plus 11, that's 17 miles. 10 by 400 meters, that's 19 and a half miles. Plus, you probably have to do recovery jogs in between each 400 meter repetition. So that could add on an extra like 2 miles or something. So yeah, they probably ran over 20 miles in a day. So they're doing very high mileage. They're probably doing 150 miles a week. So yeah, on this type of intense training system, Frank Reilly did okay for 2 years. But in his third year, his form dipped. He burnt out, and he just lost interest in running. And this is what happens. This is what I've been told. They do okay for 2 years, and the third year they just collapse. That's what Brandon was telling me. He looks at Strava at the training of the St. Mary's Twickenham lads in London, and yeah, they do okay for 2 years, but third year they're just gone. They're finished. So what they be doing is they be doing like 3 sessions a week. They do their long run at 550 mile pace, start to finish. Which for some of the slower guys in the squad, that would be like a workout. And their easy runs, they never run any slower than 6.5 minute mile pace. So yeah, it's very intense. Back then, they didn't have Strava, they didn't have GPS watches. They probably weren't able to track their training as much. They didn't have as much detail about the training. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so in August 1975, Frank Reilly came back to East Tennessee for his last year in university. But his coach said to him, sorry, you've lost interest. We're going to cancel your scholarship. So he couldn't finish his degree. And he's just sent home, And the coach gave him some money and said, here's money for food. Don't spend it at Sammy's Apex. Sammy's Apex was like a pub in Tennessee. Because Frank Reilly developed a bit of a drinking habit. But what did he do with that money? He went straight to Sammy's Apex and started drinking. But yeah, he managed to find his way home to Ballyhonus eventually. He went home. He felt ashamed having wasted rare academic and sporting opportunities, because back then in Ireland in the 70s, especially in west of Ireland, people didn't really go to university. It was a rare opportunity. Coming from a working class background. But his parents weren't too disappointed. They were kind of happy to have him back. You know what I mean? Because I guess the expectations were a lot lower back then. So yeah, he eventually got a job as a tour guide. He'd be on a bus and he'd be just talking to tourists, giving them information about certain areas and stuff like that. And then he went on to set up a magazine, The Irish Runner. That's actually, he did very well. It was a big struggle, but nowadays The Irish Runner is a very popular running magazine here in Ireland. He did quite well, though he still suffers a lot from alcoholism. And he's still alive. What would he be, 70 now? So yeah, that's the story of Frank Reedy. The training was just too intense. He burnt out. If he had better coaches, I'm sure he would have done far better. Because running a 30-minute 10K at the age of 19 is a very impressive time, especially back then. Because back then you didn't have the Ethiopians and the Kenyans dominating like you do now. So yeah, it's just sad. You know what I mean? So yeah, this is why I would strongly recommend if you do get offered a US scholarship in athletics, don't take it up. It's just not worth it. There's too much burnout over there. And this, what happened to Frank Reedy? That's not unique in any way. This is very common in America. So they have so much talent, guys who are 18, 19, but they just all burn out because they're just coached poorly. And you've seen it on YouTube in 2017. Ryan Trahan, Ryan Yarrow, all these lads, talented runners. They go on scholarship. Where was it? Texas A&M, and they just all give up after like 6 months. They didn't even last as long as Frank Reedy did. Okay.